There's a $3 material sitting in every hardware yard and construction lot that can drop food temperatures by 15 to 30 degrees, keep tomatoes fresh for nearly 3 weeks, stop eggplants from collapsing in 2 days, and do it with absolutely no electricity, no compressor, no motor, no refrigerant, no monthly bill, just sand, clay, water, and one piece of physics so old it had to be forgotten before it could become profitable. And that is the part nobody talks about. Because if a family can preserve vegetables in brutal heat using 2 clay pots and a handful of wet sand, then an entire story we were sold about cooling begins to crack. Suddenly, survival stops looking expensive. Suddenly, off-grid doesn't mean generators and lithium batteries and branded gear. Suddenly, a blackout doesn't automatically mean spoiled food by morning. This is the story of the clay refrigerator that should have become world famous, the science that made it work, and the reason almost nobody in the modern world is taught how to build one anymore. Long before electric refrigerators started humming in kitchens, people across North Africa, the Middle East, and the Indian subcontinent already understood a secret so simple it feels insulting. Water does not only quench thirst. When it evaporates, it steals heat. Not metaphorically, literally. It pulls thermal energy out of whatever surface it leaves. And if that surface happens to be a clay pot full of food, the inside gets colder while the air outside stays hot. That is the first vault. The second vault is even heavier, because this was not some village superstition. Ancient Egyptians cooled water in porous earthen jars. Persian builders used wind towers and evaporative channels to cool entire interiors. For centuries, traders kept produce alive in desert climates by combining shade, airflow, and wet, porous pottery. They were using thermodynamics before thermodynamics had a name. Then the electric refrigeration industry arrived, and to be clear, modern fridges are powerful, useful, and sometimes absolutely necessary. But they also created something else: dependence. Once cooling became a machine, people stopped learning how cooling worked. Once it came with a plug, ancient passive methods were pushed into the category of poverty, not intelligence. Not because they failed, because they didn't fit a world built on sales, replacement cycles, and power consumption. And the most devastating version of that forgotten method was rebuilt in the 1990s by a school teacher in northern Nigeria named Mohammed Ba Abba. Remember that name, because what he revived looked almost ridiculous. 2 unglazed clay pots, one smaller pot nested inside a larger one, the gap between them filled with wet sand, a damp cloth over the top. Place the whole thing in moving air, in the shade, and as the water in the sand slowly evaporates through the outer clay, it pulls heat out of the inner chamber. No battery, no fuel, no solar panel, no cord. Field use in hot, dry regions showed that vegetables that used to rot in days could last weeks longer. Tomatoes, peppers, leafy greens, eggplants, even simple drinks could stay dramatically cooler than the outside air. In some cases, families who had no access to refrigeration could finally store produce long enough to sell it instead of watching it collapse in the sun. That is where the story stops being clever and starts becoming dangerous to the modern narrative. Because now this is no longer just a survival trick. It becomes an economic weapon. Think about what a refrigerator really means in many parts of the world. It is not just convenience. It is purchase price, transport, repairs, electricity, voltage reliability, refrigerant components, and a chain of infrastructure behind the shiny door. But a pot-and-pot cooler asks for local clay, cheap sand, water, and airflow. It cannot be patented in spirit. It cannot be locked behind a software update. It does not care about outages. It does not break because a board failed. And worst of all, for any system built on recurring dependence, it teaches the user something permanent. That is always the real threat, not just a cheap solution. A cheap solution that makes people harder to control. But stay with me, because the science gets even better. When water evaporates, it absorbs what physicists call latent heat of vaporization. That means it takes a huge amount of energy to turn liquid water into vapor, and that energy is stolen from the pot, the sand, and the air right around them. Porous clay acts like a slow membrane. It lets tiny amounts of water migrate outward. Hot, dry, moving air accelerates the evaporation. More evaporation means more heat removed. More heat removed means a colder inner chamber. That is why this system works best where most people think nothing can survive. Hot, dry climates with airflow. And that is also why so many people try it once, do it wrong, and call it fake. They use glazed pots that aren't porous. They place it in humid, stagnant air. They put it in direct sun. They forget to keep the sand wet. Then they blame the method instead of the conditions. That mistake buried this knowledge for decades, because the pot fridge is not magic. It is a climate machine with rules. Break the rules, it fails. Follow the rules, it feels like cheating. This is also where history becomes strangely emotional. In communities where the revived clay cooler spread, farmers and families could hold vegetables longer, reduce spoilage, and avoid panic selling produce at terrible prices. Girls who had made snacks or produce for market could keep goods longer. Medicine and water could be kept cooler than ambient air. In survival terms, that changes everything. It buys time. It reduces waste. It protects nutrition. It turns heat from an executioner into a problem that can be managed. And still, most children today can describe a refrigerator compressor before they can explain evaporative cooling. That should bother you, because this knowledge is not obsolete. It is situationally superior. In a blackout, in an off-grid shelter, at a desert camp, in a heat emergency, after a storm, during fuel shortages, in rural places, in garages, cabins, greenhouses, and outdoor work sites, this old system can do something no normal fridge can do when the grid dies. It keeps working. Not forever, not for everything. And this part matters. A clay pot cooler is excellent for produce, bread, some drinks, and short-term cooling of certain foods. It is not a universal replacement for modern refrigeration in humid climates. It is not ideal for raw meat storage. It is not a miracle for dairy safety in tropical humidity. Anyone telling you otherwise is selling fantasy, not survival knowledge. But for the right problem, in the right place, it is almost criminally effective. And once you see how simple it is, you start noticing something uncomfortable. Entire industries are built around convincing people that resilience must be expensive, cooling must be electric, storage must be branded, preparedness must come in molded plastic and tactical packaging. Yet some of the strongest survival technologies on Earth still come from clay, fabric, airflow, and the kind of practical intelligence our ancestors considered normal. That is the secret inside the secret. The real suppressed discovery is not the pot. It is the mindset. Use physics first, use machinery second, use cost as a last resort, not the starting point. So here is exactly how to build it. Get 2 unglazed clay pots, one small enough to fit inside the other, while leaving a gap of about 1 to 3 inches all around. If the pots are glazed or sealed, do not use them. They must breathe. Plug the drain hole in the larger pot if it has one. Set a layer of clean sand at the bottom. Place the smaller pot inside, then fill the side gap completely with sand. Slowly. Add water until the sand is thoroughly wet, but not floating. Cover the top with a damp cloth. Put the whole system in full shade where air can move around it freely. A porch, breezy window, covered outdoor kitchen, or shaded courtyard is ideal. Re-wet the sand whenever it begins drying out. Then wait. Within hours, the inner chamber should feel noticeably cooler than the outside air. In very hot, dry conditions, the effect can be dramatic. Store tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, eggplants, leafy greens, citrus, bread, and drinking water inside. Keep items off the wet base by using a small rack, woven mat, or bowl if needed. Open it as little as possible. Airflow matters, shade matters, water matters. If you want better performance, elevate the pot slightly so air can move under it. Keep the cloth clean. Use finer sand for better water distribution. And never place the unit where direct sunlight bakes the outer wall, because then you are heating the very system you are trying to cool. And now the final piece, the part that makes this more than a hack. Build one before you need one. Not during a blackout, not when your fridge already failed, not in the middle of a heat wave with food going soft on the counter. Build it on a calm day. Test it. Learn your climate. Measure the difference. See what foods respond best. Because survival knowledge is only hidden until the moment you practice it. After that, it becomes yours. A $3 bag of sand is not supposed to protect food from heat. A clay pot is not supposed to challenge a machine. Ancient physics is not supposed to outperform modern dependence during a power cut. And yet here we are. The knowledge was never destroyed. It was simply made to look primitive, but when the lights go out and the kitchen gets hot and your food starts sweating on the shelf, primitive is exactly the word you want. Primitive means simple. Simple means repairable. Repairable means dependable. And dependable is what keeps people fed.